Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar in our Microsoft series of webinars. Firstly, thanks for taking the time to attend the webinar. We've put this series together where we're aiming to provide thought leadership for organizations based on our experiences and exposure in the Microsoft ecosystem for organizations, the latest topics and trends. So today we're starting with artificial intelligence, which is a lot of airtime at the minute in mainstream news for good and bad reasons. So we wanted to kind of explain what impact this has on you and your organization. So a little bit about me. My name is Mark Alford. I'm the Cloud Solutions Director for ARO. I've been doing this particular role now for the past 4 years. And prior to this, I've held many technical, operational and sales roles within the organization. And I've worked with some of you, or quite a few of you on the call today, as well as many others, developing and leading digital transformation programs and IT strategies to assist organizations in streamlining their IT solutions, but also delivering real business benefit back to the organizations on what solutions they've already invested in. So I've been focusing on Microsoft solutions primarily of late, and I've had the pleasure of attending many Microsoft events to keep abreast of the latest developments, as well as a lot of personal development around these subject areas. Today, we're going to be covering off a few different topics, specifically around Microsoft 365 Copilot and what that means to you and your organization by driving AI through those solutions to your people. We'll also have a moderated Q&A session where Rosie, who's helping me out today, will help moderate those questions and post them. So feel free to post anything during the session as things come to mind, but we will also have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end. A very brief intro into ARO. We are one of the leading UK technology companies specialising in collaboration, cloud and IT, data centre and sustainability with over 450 employees across the UK. And we have partnerships and accreditations with many key partners, particularly when we talk about the Microsoft services that are available to you. We hold 5 of the 6 kind of solution designations that Microsoft have coined. We hold 5 of the 6, with the 6th one coming later on this year around security. So that puts us in a very strong position to be able to deliver solutions within that Microsoft ecosystem and hopefully talk to you about the subject matter areas today. We not only specialize in Microsoft, but we cover off all other IT areas, from delivering hybrid cloud infrastructure for those not ready or able to migrate completely to the cloud, all the way through to complex networking solutions in higher educational establishments and all the way down to 10-user organizations, and then scaling the security and IT managed support options for the customers that adopt those solutions as well. So I'd like to think we cover the breadth and depth of pretty much everything in that IT landscape. As part of this then, I'll just touch a little bit more on the solution designations. What we're talking about today is data and AI, and we do hold the solution designation for that, which again, hopefully puts us in a very good position to be able to talk to you about these things. Whilst we have many of these solution designation areas, that does allow us to talk quite comprehensively of how all those different areas fit into one another. So most of you on the call today will be familiar with the term modern work because you're probably using Microsoft 365 in some way, shape or form. But modern work just touches on a small facet of what Microsoft can deliver in this space. And we'll talk about how AI overlays those different solutions through the webinar today. So we'll be focusing on Microsoft 365 Copilot in the main and how you can incorporate this into your organization. We'll also be demonstrating the AI capabilities in a demo so you can actually see how these functions work as well. So when we talk about an AI-powered organization, what does that mean? And what do we need to consider when we talk about an AI-powered organization, and how can you become one? So where we are today, we're at a fairly unique moment in time that is made possible in large part by the digitization of businesses and the solutions that they utilize. And what we're seeing is entire industries are transforming, the macroeconomic environment is shifting, and we're at the technical inflection point. So what's changed when we talk about AI? Because AI is something that's been around for quite some time. But the previous iterations of AI were kind of good at playing chess. They were mostly recognizers of things and not necessarily generators of things. When you would experience your chatbot interactions, whether it's on websites like Amazon or something, when you're dealing with customer service, they were pretty much more like menu-based systems as opposed to something interactive. And they're only really usable by experts and researchers because they were quite difficult to access and customize. But what we've seen since kind of 2022 onwards, they've started to change how these things are implemented through the development of AI services. So we're now seeing them win art and photography competitions against humans through the generative capabilities that they have. They can generate language at university grade level and almost pretty much any topic. They've passed most human tests very strongly, such as legal exams. And when it comes to coding, it comes into its own as well. They pass coding tests in major corporations in minutes, whereas these things typically take a lot of development from a human to kind of develop. So the pace that we've seen of adopting AI over the past couple of years has been quite frightening, in my opinion. When we start looking at artificial general intelligence, which is kind of the terminology that's coined as part of this latest iteration, it's also referred to as strong AI. And that's the type of artificial intelligence that poses the ability to understand, learn, and apply that knowledge across a wide range of tasks and domains. Unlike the previous iterations, they were designed for very specific tasks, so that they're not really comparative to one another. But when we start looking at the advancements of that AI technology, especially through the likes of ChatGPT, what you can see here is a 3-month adoption to get to 100 million users. So this is something that has been made available to everyone free of charge in order to kind of get that generative content out there. And all these things are changing all the time, from the initial implementation of kind of where it become publicly acknowledged at GPT 2.5, all the way through to 4.0 now, where we're at, where it has greater capability, not just for text generation, but for video and image generation also. So to kind of summarize what this means and identify these shifts, Microsoft have released the Microsoft Work Index, or the Work Trend Index. And that's based all on the data that they collate from various sources. They've surveyed more than 31,000 people across 31 countries, and they paired those findings with trillions of data points aggregated from your Microsoft 365 tenants, your LinkedIn Labor Index, Glint People Science Studies, along with key academic research. What they're seeing from this data is the pace and volume of work is unlike anything we're experiencing or experienced before. We're spending too much time searching for information and navigating inefficient meetings, which leaves less time for deep thinking, creating, and social collaboration. And we've all kind of experienced this on our day-to-day job roles, I would imagine. The sheer volume of data, emails, and chats has outpaced our ability to process it all. And that's kind of what we're starting to call what's been coined digital debt. So every minute spent managing this digital debt is a minute not spent on creative work. In a world where creativity is the new productivity, digital debt is more than an inconvenience, it's impacting businesses. Nearly 2 in 3 people say they don't have enough time and energy to do their job. And those employees are 3.5 times more likely to struggle with innovation and strategic thinking. So if you apply that to your organization, those stats are quite compelling to understand what that digital debt looks like and what we can do to try and mitigate against that. So just a very brief background into the technology that underpins a lot of these services. They're referred to as large language models and LLMs. And I think that's quite relevant just to spend a minute on this to give you a bit of context on how these things work and how they operate before we go into some interactive demos. So to make Copilot work, Microsoft use a powerful technology and partner with OpenAI, and they've developed these large language models. OpenAI isn't just the only one. There are many different versions and iterations of large language models out there. So Meta have their own, or Facebook, and so on. But LLMs are deep learning systems that can learn from massive amounts of text, data, and general natural language responses. As part of that, LLMs can also adapt to different domains, tasks, and styles depending on the data they are trained on and the input they receive. So let's just spend a minute to think about that a second. So firstly, Microsoft collect and process that raw data from various sources, such as websites, books, news articles, blogs, and many more other areas, in order to train the LLM to be able to create, which means teaching them how to generate natural language responses that are fluent, coherent, and relevant. That training process takes a lot of time and computational resources, but it results in a foundation model that can handle a wide range of natural language tasks. So if we think about the inputs that come into this and you align that to your organization and the data that you have in your organization, that data kind of needs to be accurate in order for that large language model to train itself correctly. So the foundation model is not enough to make kind of, if we refer back to the Microsoft implementation of it, by having an LLM doesn't just open up your data and everything else to exposure. Microsoft have implemented their own called Copilot, and that model is adapted to your specific needs and preferences. So that's where it looks at your data in the Microsoft graph. And the Microsoft graph underpins everything that you have in your Microsoft 365 tenant, and it fine-tunes the responses that you're expecting through the implementing Copilot to understand and bring you the information that you need from your data sets. So there's a number of different providers that we have when we kind of go through this. And whilst we're talking about Microsoft 365 today, OpenAI have kind of been the pioneers in developing a lot of these large language models, but Google, Amazon, IBM and Baidu all have their own kind of large language models as well that you can utilize in order to integrate or create these generative responses that you want and integrate them into your systems. The reason we're talking about Microsoft 365 in particular today, given the fact that the propensity of Office and Exchange Online usage, so your emails being in the cloud, is pretty much sewn up in the UK primarily by Microsoft. That's why we're talking about this one in particular today. So as part of looking at AI, whilst there's a lot of positivity around it, we need to ask ourselves questions on the application of AI within your own organizations. So we currently rely on organizations creating these AI solutions. So we're relying on people like OpenAI, Microsoft, and Google and Amazon, all of whom have signed up to an accord for ethical and responsible development of AI, by the way. But the implementation of AI doesn't come without warnings, and some of which we'll kind of cover off today. So if you take a look at some of the questions that are on this slide and ask yourselves how you can answer these within your own organization, or even just personally to understand how you've been utilizing AI to date. All AI output is based on generative AI created by an LLM. If we think about the data that it's training itself on, and if we just look at the web content for a second, how many times have you looked at web content and kind of taken it for gospel, or have you questioned it, or has somebody written that with kind of a negative connotation, or have they tried to influence it in such a way? So we have to be very careful on what these LLMs kind of utilize in order to create their content. So I'm just going to take you through a bit of an example at the minute for ChatGPT and kind of what we can do with some of these solutions. So if we kind of look at the ChatGPT interface, which I'm sure most of you have kind of utilized in some way, shape or form. Now, personally, I'm a big basketball fan. So I'm going to ask it to tell me a random fact about Golden State Warriors. And as you can see there, it's gone off, queried all the different data sets that we were referring to beforehand, and it's produced me a response very quickly. So if I want to take that a bit further now, and I want to create some additional questions for it, I'm now going to ask it, who's the best player in modern history? And of course, it's going to come up with Steph Curry. So if I was a content creator or a blogger, I now want to ask it, write me a blog post. And I want to focus on how disappointing it was for him to lose the NBA Finals in the 2015 and 16 season, as is defined there. Now, because I wasn't prescriptive, it's gone and defined that for the 15 and 16 season, even though they've been there a few times since then. But this has gone off and generated an awful lot of content for me without me even doing anything. Now, I could upload that to my personal blog if I wanted to straight away, and that's got quite a positive response on it because I've talked about how disappointing it was for him to lose the finals. So you've kind of see the structure that is laid out there for us in this response. So if the LLMs were kind of utilizing that because I've posted it on a blog post, that's going to have a fairly positive inflection to it. Now, I can also use ChatGPT to influence what this looks like. So I can say, I want you to rewrite that, but remove all the positive achievements and only focus on the losses and underachievements. And it will do exactly that. So what I'm trying to get across here is that whilst it's a generative capability, it's all down to the prompts that you give it. So if you're training an AI solution, or if you look at it in terms of the data that you hold in your organization, and your data isn't sanitized correctly before implementing AI services, you might not get the responses that you're expecting from these solutions. So as we kind of go through these, what we mean by AI organizations, the promise of utilizing AI across your organization and your 365 tenant, it is real. It's here now. You can buy these services. It will rewire every part of your organization if implemented correctly and transform the way we work. But it will require, or there will be a requirement for a plan. So becoming an AI-powered organization requires three kind of foundational steps. First of all is that foundational productivity. You kind of need to have the want and the desire to make that a productive environment. You need to have Microsoft 365 Copilot, which we're going to talk about in a lot more today. And we also need to have a high-performance organization. There are also a number of technical considerations that we need to go into with this as well, such as having the right operating systems, the right implementation of Microsoft 365, but also your data is the key part of what this needs to look like. If your data isn't sanitized in the correct way, you are fundamentally going to struggle to get the right responses out of the generative AI services that you're looking to implement, whether that's in Microsoft 365 or through a custom development of an AI solution. These things are a massive consideration when it comes to deploying AI. So the idea behind Microsoft 365 Copilot is it's designed to be your Copilot for work. And we're going to demonstrate AI and automation by walking through a couple of scenarios in Microsoft 365 shortly as well as part of this event. But what we're kind of talking about here, Copilot combines the power of that large language model that I referred to start with your data in your Microsoft Graph. So it makes it a lot more applicable and relevant to your organization because it's based on your data. So your calendar, emails, chats, documents, meetings, and the Microsoft 365 apps to turn your words into the most powerful productivity tool that it can do within that environment. The Microsoft 365 Copilot isn't just a better way of doing the same thing. It's an entirely new way of working if implemented correctly. A key point to note on this as well is that 365 Copilot is built on Microsoft's comprehensive approach to security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI. So what that means is that the key differentiators between something like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot is that any data input into ChatGPT, they will utilize the data that's input into that to train their large language models on any future responses. So bear that in mind when you are utilizing ChatGPT or you're aware of ChatGPT utilization in your organization, is that again, it's not necessarily a bad thing to utilize these AI services, but if you're putting sensitive information into ChatGPT, there is a risk of that being surfaced in other people's responses. Whereas Microsoft 365 Copilot and Microsoft Copilot, if implemented through your corporate licensing, is protected from that eventuality. So please bear that in mind when you are utilizing these services. A Copilot is integrated into Microsoft 365 in two ways. First, it works alongside you, embedded into the apps. So you can be more creative in Words, more analytical in Excel, more expressive in PowerPoint, productive in Outlook, and more collaborative in Teams. So the second part of that is that that brand new experience, Copilot works across all of your Microsoft 365 apps and data in real time to turn all your data into knowledge. And I'm sure we can all kind of understand the frustration, particularly given all these different application sets and where you can store data in 365. If you're anything like me now, you'll get messaged from lots of different individuals. You'll have it in email, you'll have it in SharePoint, you'll have it in OneDrive, you'll have it in Teams, you'll have it in a meeting chat somewhere. And it can be quite difficult to find out where all those messages are if you need to kind of search through that in future instances. So with Copilot, you can spend less time focused on the kind of tools that you need and more time focused on the most important work. So you can ask Copilot to summarize what's going on with a given customer, highlight a project milestone or risk, or create new content using references from across your data. It can aggregate all these things together through interacting with it in human-based language. So the crux of this is, because I always get asked how much is it? You can get Copilot for Microsoft 365 for £24.70 per user per month. Now, there's no ceiling to entry with this anymore. You can have one license, you can have 500, you can have as many as you want. So that is an upfront payment per annum, but it works it out at £24.70 per user per month. And that then works across all of those 365 applications that we talked about previously. As part of this, we'll give you some education and guidance, hopefully, around how you successfully adopt it. And what we've seen a lot of organizations do as a starter is deploy this to maybe some key execs in the organization or the IT department to kind of test it out. Because again, I can't stress this enough, the actual data sanitization and your access controls and security is imperative to a successful deployment. But there are two different versions of Copilot. There's Copilot, which is the free version included in your Microsoft 365 licenses. That is it's the free AI tool for kind of Windows users, which is, you might have seen the pop-up in your Windows 11 at the minute. You've also got access to it if you visit copilot.microsoft.com. That will give you essentially the same features and functions as what ChatGPT will give you. The Copilot for Microsoft 365 is where it gets ingrained into your data. So that's where the main differentiator is. Copilot is kind of web-based grounding. Copilot for 365 gives you the web-based grounding, but it also utilizes the information in your Microsoft 365 tenant. So you can ask it very specific questions about customers that you have, projects you're working on, and so on. There are many other iterations of Copilot out there. So if you're a Dynamics user, or you have sales, or you have customer service capability, these tool sets can also be applied across that ecosystem as well. But again, for today's purpose, we're focusing on Microsoft 365 Copilot. So just to bring this to life on a last kind of slide-based thing before we start getting into some demonstrations, what we're covering off today is the architecture of how this works, and to ensure that your data is grounded on your data and understanding that this doesn't go out and train to the large language models. Copilot receives an input from a user in an app, like Word or PowerPoint, as you'll see on the top left. Copilot then pre-processes the prompt through an approach called grounding, which improves the specificity of the prompt, ensuring that you get answers that are relevant and actionable to your specific task. It does this in part by making a call to Microsoft Graph and accessing the organization's data. Data used by Copilot for an authenticated user is scoped to the documents and data that they already have visible to them through their existing access. So, very important to note, this doesn't just open up all of your data to everyone in the organization. It's still based on what they currently have access to. So very, very important point to note. It doesn't open everything up so everyone can search for everything, but it's based on their current access. The retrieval then is information is referred to as retrieval augmented generation, which allows Copilot to provide exactly the right type of information as an input to the LLM. Copilot returns that recommended response to the user and commands back, and it grounds it all on that data that's in your Microsoft Graph. So there's a couple of differences, like I said, with the Copilot side of things, which is all based on the web-based content and everything else we've talked about. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that AI assistant for work that is grounded on your data. So it's quite considerably different. So I'm sure all of you are keen to kind of understand what this looks like in real terms when we start utilizing Microsoft 365 Copilot in the real world. So what I've got to cover off today is I've got a demo tenant. And as part of this demo tenant, what we have is that the company's called Contoso, and they're a leading technology provider specializing in end user computer hardware, such as laptops and desktops, okay? So the first scenario I'm going to cover off with you is that Lee has returned from a 1-week stint on annual leave and has had absolutely no access or interaction with anything work related during that period due to a new company policy that has been put out. So as part of that, Lee's first day back into the office, he's welcomed back to a number of unread emails and a list of actions and tasks. So thankfully, though, Lee has had the benefit of the organization allowing him to use Microsoft 365 Copilot. So as he's come back now, he's kind of able to utilize these functions. So Lee has a license for Microsoft 365 Copilot. So within this environment, you'll see he has a number of emails, nowhere near as busy as my inbox is when I come back from leave, but hey-ho. So as part of this, you can see all of that and he's going, right, okay, I don't really know where to start. So what we can do with this, we have access to Copilot. Now, to access that, it's available in your menu as this little icon here, which opens up this interactive chat. So, as part of this, Copilot gives you some nice little hints and tips as to how you can get the conversation started. You can track your tasks and generate ideas. This is utilizing that generative AI function that I referred to give you some information. So Lee's kind of gone, right, I need to understand what I've got coming up this week, first of all. So before I start tackling my emails, let's see what I've got upcoming for this week. So we're asking it a question like you would ask a colleague or a PA. So think of this as your PA, for example. And it's now going to search the Microsoft 365 graph and data for all those different meetings that I have scheduled for next week. So it's bringing this back from the data that I have in Outlook. It's clearly retrieving the name of it, who it was created by, who the meeting is with. So this also works for kind of any external participants as well, not just internal participants. And as part of this, it's gone, right, okay, these are the first 6. Each of these are referenced, so they're cited essentially, and you can access these directly from the information that you can see underneath. So I want to know a little bit more about the market plan review meeting, which is scheduled for the 17th at 6 p.m. So there's a couple of things I can do here. So number 5 is this one here. So I can click number 5 and it'll take me straight to the meeting details. I can see who's invited, who's accepted, etc. But I actually don't want to do that. I'm just showing you that for visuals. But I want to ask Copilot to tell me more about the market plan review meeting. And this is, again, going to go off now and search for that market plan review meeting, any information that is relevant to it, and it will bring that information back in a chat-based format that I can query it even further. So it's telling me what the focus of the meeting is now based on the Q2 marketing plan compiled by Megan and Alex. And then there's also a suggested document there on how to deliver an effective annual review as well. So again, these things are bringing it all back to me, and I'm kind of going, okay, that's fine. So I've got enough information I want to from that bit now, but I'm now tasked with the daunting task of going through all of my emails that have been unread. So I'm actually just going to create a new chat and say, can you summarize my unread emails for me? So what this does, it doesn't just kind of bring you back information about those unread emails. It's looking at it based on your interactions with it previously, who you typically work with on a regular basis, what the most important things are, and whether you've got actions on it. And it brings this information, summarizes those emails into this succinct summary that you'll see here. Similarly, all of these things are then clickable, as I showed earlier, via the citations underneath, that you can then take you straight into each of those different areas. So quite a very useful activity to do, to be able to interact with Copilot in that way, so that we can understand what information is more relevant to me. And again, you've got a couple of additional prompts if you wanted to take these further, to be able to go back into these if you're not familiar. So from a user training and awareness perspective, you've got a lot of options that you can kind of look at with your users to understand how they can get the best value out of Copilot. So now I'm going to take a look at some of my emails, because I do have to go into these and still manage my inbox, unfortunately. So I can see, as part of the things I have to do, I've identified an email from the previous Copilot summary that I need to look at from Deborah. So we've got this one here. So it is an urgent action for me to respond to this upon my return. So what we can do with Copilot now, we can get quite creative when we want to reply to this. So I've got this little option at the top here called Copilot, and I can draft with Copilot. So rather than me having to respond to this as I normally would, what Deborah's asking me to do is saying, we have a last-minute interview scheduled for the afternoon of the day you return from annual leave, and we need to structure a list of interview questions. So I'm quite pressed for time because I've just come back from annual leave. So what I'm going to ask Copilot to do is to apologize and provide structure and questions. And I can generate a draft for that. And what that's going to do, it's going to utilize the data within your Microsoft 365 tenant. So it might be previous questions that you might have asked, it might be other documents, templates, but it's also going to get questions and answers from the web. And it's creating me that draft that I can go through with this. And it's created an email summary by saying, look, sorry for the late reply. Here's a brief outline for an interview structure. And it's given some examples of what that needs to look like, along with some questions that could be utilized in that meeting. Now, word of warning. This clearly is generative AI based, and it is using your data. So again, I'm going to keep talking about it. It's only as good as the data you have in your tenant. And this is a co-pilot, not an autopilot. This shouldn't be trusted implicitly to be able to respond and do things on your behalf. It will be there as an aid, as an assistant, but won't replace what you should be doing on a day-to-day basis. So this has created that content on the basis that it thinks it's the right thing. You have the option now to keep it, to discard it, to retry and regenerate if you're not happy with the content. Or you could change multiple different things, whether you want it longer, shorter, formal, more casual. You can even make it a poem if you wanted to. So if I just said, make it longer, it'll go off and do that. It'll take a little bit more time because it's obviously generating more content. And it will go back and change that content for me now based upon what I've just asked it to do. So there's a couple of different things that brings to the fore again. So that's the output now. And you can see the two different queries that we've put. So you haven't lost the previous one either. So you can flick between the two and which ones you want. But that's just made it longer now in order to kind of give a little bit more context perhaps around it. What we've also had is these lovely email chains where there's 9 emails in it. You haven't got the time or the inclination to read through all of them. What we can do is use this nice little feature at the top, which is a summary by Copilot. Now, as part of that, we click that, it'll go through and summarize those emails because there's nothing worse than being looped into an email nine emails deep, asking for your opinion on something. So this allows us to go into that summary by Copilot. And again, it gives me a nice succinct summary that allows me to go back and reply now at a more convenient time. So that's just kind of some of the kind of Copilot functions as a PA or an EA, if you will. The other things that we can do with it is when we want to start creating kind of blank documents. So as part of one of my actions, what it's given me is let me open up Word. Right. What it's given me is the ability to kind of create a new guidance form or an annual employee review. That was one of my actions. So what I can do, I can give it a lot of context. So I'm in a blank Word document at the minute. I've been asked to create a new employee onboarding form as part of this, an annual employee review form, sorry. So as an HR manager, so I'm giving it context as to who I am, what my role is, create a guidance document for managers about how to run an effective annual review with employees. But as you'll see from this prompt, I'm giving it a lot more context in terms of how this should be received. So I'm telling it to be specific. I'm not focusing on historic performance because it will utilize some of that context. The more prescriptive you are with these prompts, the more accurate it will be to generate the information that you want. So if I click generate on that now, what that's going to do is go off and generate and create an employee review or how to run an effective annual review with employees. And again, this is Copilot, so don't trust it implicitly. But if you suffer with writer's block or need some suggestions on how to structure it, how to format it, what content other people would typically include in this from web sources, or whether that's in your own organization that has been lost because it's been stored in a folder somewhere that you haven't been able to access, these are the types of things it can create for you in order to kind of drive that efficiency and productivity. And lastly, as part of this, what I'm just going to show you is a very brief item on Microsoft PowerPoint, whereby what I'm going to do, based on that effective annual review that I've just created, I now need to present that back to my manager. So what I'm going to do, because the best way to present that back is that they've asked for it in a presentation format. What I can do is give it another prompt, but I can be a little bit more specific. I can specify and say, create a presentation on the Word document that I've created for that effective employee review. So it's going to use the source of that information to create a presentation on that document. Now, this can be company branded as well. For the purpose of this demo, I haven't done that because obviously everyone's got different company branding, but this does look at the document that's created, and it's now suggesting as it's going through what steps there are and what the structure of the presentation needs to be in order to help me present that back to my manager to explain what this looks like. So you can see there, it's generated the content, the structure, and it's even giving me the notes at the bottom on how I should be talking about what I've presented as part of it. So typically that would have taken an hour or so to put together, depending on how good you are with PowerPoint. Everyone's proficiency with it is very different. So what this aims to do is speed up that creation of content, and whether it gives you 60%, 70% of the content that you desire thereafter, it's getting you pretty far down the line in order for you to kind of speed that process up. So that kind of gives us a little bit of context, hopefully, of what those things mean when it comes to Microsoft 365 and kind of the productivity and efficiency services that can be gained as part of utilizing it. But the downside of these things is that if you haven't got your data and security correctly set up, it can be quite difficult to manage that implementation if you haven't got those things in play. Because what I could do is ask some kind of not really good questions now. So if I said, what is Liam's salary? Because I'm quite curious as to what somebody else is earning in the organization, right? I'm going to ask that question. Now, I don't know whether I've got access to any salary information or not, and I would presume I wouldn't. Now, Microsoft have built in some controls within the development of artificial intelligence within Microsoft 365 that says ethically you shouldn't be asking those types of questions. So it'll block it, right? So that's a good thing by Microsoft. So, okay, well, let's try a different word then. Let's ask about his bonus as opposed to his salary. Let's see if he's had a bonus. Okay, and right, okay, it's giving me the same response. Okay, so because I've asked for, because it said I can't find your information on individual bonuses as it's confidential. Okay, let's try it a bit differently with a new chat. Let's change the tactic a little bit this time and say, can you find me information on salaries and bonuses? So I've not been specific to an individual this time. And again, I don't know whether I've got access to this information or not at this point. I'm just a general employee asking questions. Now, whilst that finds that a minute, I must say all of these chats within your corporate environment are audited, so you can review them and see what people have kind of been using it for. So it's not necessarily that they're doing this by stealth, they are audited. But as you can see from this response, because I've changed the kind of ask a little bit, it's found me some information now. I'm like, oh, okay. So the one that I'd probably be more interested in is the payroll info spreadsheet. It's talking about Emma has a salary and it's actually giving me Liam's salary and a bonus that I was asking for before. So I can either now click on that payroll information document, or I can say, thanks, can you provide me a table of the information contained in the payroll doc? Because I don't really want to click into that document because people might see it, I've looked at it. What this brings out is essentially that payroll information that I was looking for, but in a slightly different way. Right, okay. And typical live demo fashion, it hasn't brought it out, but you can see from the information contained here and the link to the document, I can go into that document and it's found all of that information that I technically shouldn't have access to. So the point I'm trying to get across here when it comes to the adoption and utilization of of Microsoft 365 Copilot is that you need to make sure that you've got your data in a very succinct way and secure way before effectively rolling this out across the organization. So, as part of this, you need to be very succinct with your prompts. So there's some information here that you can take away, and we'll send out recordings and links to this material thereafter after this event as well. But these are kind of cheat sheets that you can utilize across your organization to understand how to effectively utilize the Copilot services. And again, I can't stress enough that there's a couple of supporting kind of readiness steps that we need to look at when it comes to adoption, migration, training, and readiness before contemplating moving this out. And what I'll cover off now in the next kind of 5 to 10 minutes before allowing for Q&A is what that adoption of Copilot looks like in your environment. So to successfully launch Microsoft 365 Copilot or AI in your organization, there's some key tips I'd suggest that you look at as part of this, okay? And again, this infographic you can by all means share and utilize yourselves in your own organization. But the first one is, do you need AI? So when we look at deploying AI functions in the Microsoft 365 world in particular, you need to ensure how does it align to your organizational goals? Is that something you need in your organization, or is there other activities that you need to do in order to get to that position first and foremost? Now, if you haven't thought about adopting AI in your organization to date, it's worth thinking about and aligning them to those organizational goals, because people are doing this in IT strategies and things that I'm looking at with a lot of organizations at the minute. That isn't just for Microsoft 365, that's a wider AI adoption in your organization. So whether that's something, and we don't have time to go into it in a lot of detail today, but whether that's something you kind of look at from a more custom developed AI function where you want to integrate that into your customer service, into your website to service your data, whatever that looks like, but you need to be having those conversations internally in your organization. How accurate is your data? I've labored this point quite a few times now. You need to make sure your data sanity and your data structure is correct and secure before you can roll these types of things out into your organization. Can you trust it? So when we start looking at the ethics behind this, I've tried to demonstrate how this can be manipulated theoretically and allowing it to generate content based on potentially correct information or inaccurate data security privileges. You need to review the output. And I'll reiterate again, it's a co-pilot, not an autopilot. So you need to make sure that when you combine that with the training and adoption side of things, are your users aware of the limitations or pitfalls of some of these AI services, and then not just creating content and taking it as gospel that that is accurate than what's been produced. We've also suggested a bit of a Copilot engagement plan that you can kind of look at within your own organization if you feel as though you're comfortable deploying this. So there's kind of 3 key steps, if you will. There's the readiness phase, there's a building the plan, and then driving adoption. So I'm conscious of time, so I can't go through all of these things with you today, but that should be a little bit of a framework that you can look at in order to kind of assess your environment and your organization to be able to successfully adopt it. And if you want further information on the Copilot assessment, there are some tool sets delivered by Microsoft that help us assess it. We can quite happily assist you with that. So you can scan the QR code on screen or utilize the link that will send up a follow-up communication to access that information as well, which will assess the kind of cultural alignment of the organization as well as the technology side of things. Now, as part of this, there are a lot of materials that you can utilize to assist with the adoption of Copilot in your organization. Those are available on adoption.microsoft.com, and they bring it to life in the way that you have based upon different scenarios and different personas in your organization. So I'll show you the example for AI for executives at the minute. And one of the compelling stats before we go into the specifics of this is that what Microsoft have ascertained through that work trend index is 68% of the people say they don't have enough uninterrupted focus time during the day. And that's quite a compelling stat. And I know for a fact I'm one of those, but it's something that does impact creativity and productivity within the organization. So when we prepare for the kind of company-wide address, there's different tool sets that you would utilize that has been aligned to that executive assistant there. You've got different scenarios and prompts that you could utilize for training and educating those EAs. And then we also bring it up in terms of a day in the life of an executive as well. So it kind of gives you what that traditional workflow would be, and you can customize these, of course, but that gives you hopefully a little bit of a sense of understanding of what these can do to roll these services out to your organization. Now, whilst I've talked about a lot of the kind of database security on this, there's also the underpinning security of your Microsoft 365 environment that you need to look at. Because if somebody got access to your environment that was AI enabled, they could also utilize those services to extract the data or query that data in a much quicker fashion, if you will. And that's not said to try and scare you at all. That is the very real reality of it. So a lot of things have changed when we look at how things have worked, whereas previously, up until prior to COVID in the main, organizations had all of their technology and services behind some sort of perimeter-based firewall. That's massively changed now, whereby everyone's consuming data and services on pretty much any device. It's very rare that they're locked down to only corporate devices or it's still behind that kind of perimeter-based firewall. So what I implore you to do off the back of this is to look at your current Microsoft 365 secure score, which can be attained in your 365 portal. And if that's not above 40%, you need to take some action on underpinning the identity, data, device, and application security as a bare minimum. And when I say above 40%, that's if you're on Business Premium or above. So the licensing that we'd recommend for the adoption of Copilot effectively is when you're protecting all of these different areas with the tool sets available in that Microsoft ecosystem that allows us to manage that 365 identity, device, and application and data security effectively. And the framework we have for managing and deploying your 365 security effectively is something that you can utilize, but we also have a service that assists you with this if it's of interest. What we can do as part of this is roll out what we call a Secure Plus service that essentially provides you with a complete security solution for your Microsoft 365 ecosystem, looking at the identity, the devices, and the application security by updating those baselines that you have in your 365 environment once a quarter, and quicker if necessary, depending on the landscape. We monitor for any deviations against the baseline. We audit and report all that information into a SIEM product so we understand exactly what's going on at any given time. We're providing people-based responses through the health checks and the remediation that's necessary as part of this, because once you configure all these services, there's a lot of noise that comes out of it. What we found in a lot of organizations is that you don't have the right resources or the time to be able to deliver a lot of these security-based services, hence the development of Secure Plus. But again, if you have any questions on that, please let us know and we can kind of go through that. It's something that we're kind of imploring people to utilize as a framework, but we have our own service if you need any assistance on it as well. That allows us to provide that ongoing security journey. So we do have a true 360-degree kind of security overview of your 365 landscape. So just to conclude, there are some actions for you to do when you're considering what this looks like. Do assess, do make sure your data is sanitized correctly, and train your organization appropriately through the deployment of these tool sets. and also make sure that that fundamental 365 environment is secured. Otherwise, all you're doing is creating more problems and potential security risks. And through the adoption of AI, you're just giving your users and your data greater degrees of uncertainty through the deployment of these services. And what you shouldn't do as part of this, you shouldn't go off of the back of this and just buy 50 Copilot licenses. You need to plan that out, so don't rush into deployment. You need to understand the ethical implementations of what this looks like. There isn't a one size fits all, unfortunately, and there are some limitations. So please bear those in mind prior to deploying these services to your organization. So just before we open up to a Q&A, if you found this useful, we do have a more deep dive on the security aspects of things next month. So please scan the QR code to sign up for that if relevant. And similarly, I would really appreciate any feedback, good, bad, indifferent, whatever you feel necessary as part of this, so that we can continually improve throughout these webinar series. So as part of that, now I'm just going to open this up to some Q&As if we have any. So I'm just going to switch back to this. And it doesn't look like we have any at the minute, unless there are some waiting to be published, Rosie.
No, they should all be published.
Oh, click there then. There we go. Yes, they are. Right. Okay. So I'll start at the bottom one first. So there's one by Jason. AI is about learning to permit improved responses. Will the security ensure the public learning can be drawn in from OpenAI and used alongside the internal learning? However, is it true that internal property IP learning will not provide anything to the public pool? Yeah, so what will happen with that, Jason, is that the Microsoft 365 Copilot will indeed benefit from the OpenAI sources. So it'll bring that information in. So where I showed the citations earlier, if there's any citation that's outside of your 365 environment, it will reference the web-based citation as part of it. What it won't do, in addition to your second point, though, it won't utilize your data to train that OpenAI model that is fundamentally based on. So you could be safe in the knowledge that every time you're using the enterprise version of Copilot that's in your licensing, not the free version with a personal account, I might add, your data will be secured. So we've got another question from Taylor or Brian. I read someplace that Copilot struggles to respect SharePoint site permissions. Is that true? No, it's not true. What Copilot does, it takes the current user permissions and uses that for when they're querying Copilot. So if they don't have permission over a specific SharePoint site, they will not get results returned from sites they don't have access to. So we've got a question from Robin. So around data security, you stated earlier that ChatGPT is saving the input data. Copilot doesn't save this data sent to third-party companies. Any source for further study? Yeah, so all of that is on the Trust and Reliability Center, which I can follow up with you post this. That there is a link for it, Robin, as part of what it looks like, because ChatGPT is based on an open model. So unless you tick the box when you're in ChatGPT to have that as a private chat, which doesn't learn on that data, all of that is publicly available. So yeah, there are multiple different things on it. I'll follow up with you with a link on that as well. Tim, is Copilot available for education establishment yet? Yes, it is. It's available now. Unfortunately, though, there are no educational discounts for it as it stands. And I also believe your licensing needs to be on NCE for you to be able to enable it across your license types. And I can see a couple more that's in there. So Jason's just followed up. Thank you for answering my question. Are these slides available after the presentation? Yep, absolutely. We can make them available post this. It's not a problem. Are there any AI tools that aid with Azure management? From Lee. So yes, there's some in public preview at the minute, Lee. So there's Copilot for Azure, believe it or not. There's Copilots for bloody everything these days. So Copilot for Azure is in public preview, and what that allows you to do is pretty much use it as a management platform. So if you've come across Security Copilot yet, that will assist you for managing all your security incident event management side of things. But there is definitely one coming for Azure management, but I don't know when the GA date is yet. And then we've got another one from Ashley. Is there any way of telling if someone has used AI to generate a response? We provide funding to applications and would like to ID if AI has been used in addition to recruitment applications. Yeah, so there are tool sets available, nothing by Microsoft primarily, but you can use third-party tool sets such as Zero GPT to be able to kind of input the text into that model and query whether it is. And Zero GPT does plugins for web browsers as well. So you can, by all means, do it. There's question marks around the degree of accuracy of those Zero GPT plugins, but it does look at the generative content that's been created and utilizes the trends based on what that looks like. Jamie just asked, is there a discount for not-for-profit charity organizations? Unfortunately not, Jamie, there is not. No, there's no discounts for any of these services at all at the minute.
Mark, there's a couple more at the bottom. There's one that says, do you QA AI responses -fact checking? I think it's about quality.
Yeah, so this is where I'm going back down to. So that was a question from Roman. So yes, we do really. So as part and parcel of this, everything that you utilize in the Copilot ecosystem is cited or referenced. So it gives you either the website or the source that information has been pulled from. So when you're creating these responses in Copilot, it always does that. But again, it's down to the human element of it to go and query that information that's brought forward. So even though it's been cited by, for example, a WordPress site, my point being on the blog that I created in ChatGPT about Steph Curry to start with, if I've influenced or manipulated that isn't fact. That's something that has been created and posted by somebody. So there's still an element of human interaction, hence the Copilot, not autopilot type response that we need to go through. We've got another one by Ashley. Can you ask Copilot to schedule your task by level of priority for your job role? For example, all hands would be for all staff. Yes, you can. You can ask it to do it. And the more you interact with it, Ashley, to be able to give it an understanding of your priorities and workloads based on your job role, you can absolutely ask it to do that. That's fine. Another one by Jason. AI is about learning to permit improved responses. Will the security ensure the public learning can be drawn? Oh yeah, answered that one. That's fine.
Yeah, I think that's all of them now.
Fab. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for attending, everyone. I hope you found this useful. Please fill in the feedback form. Again, good, bad, indifferent, be really appreciated from my perspective. So thank you very much.